Sorry,
So
it's already.
recently, oh, okay,
No, it's
fine.
fine. I mean, if you want to ask, it's okay as long as it's.
Okay. No, I just recently noticed, on Facebook that there are so
Sorry,
many
it's already.
programs, conferences happening in Spanish on Hegel. So I was just curious, how and when did it start? I mean, Hegel's prominent in Spanish. I mean, if you have some idea, because I think,
in in South America
yeah,
mostly.
so
So
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
there's a
yeah.
strong Southern American Hegel and German idealism network. That's true.
Okay, maybe we can come back to that, Suresh, a little bit
Okay.
later.
Yeah, yeah, fine, fine.
Yeah, so I think we are now live streaming. So welcome everyone to another installment of Being Singular. It's a seminar cycle hosted by myself, Gregory Moss, at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and Alessandro De Cesaris at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland, although he is in Turin right now. So yeah, welcome everybody once again. And today I have the honor and pleasure to introduce Nastasia Pugliese, who is an assistant professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. But I know her primarily through the University of Georgia, where the two of us were graduate students. So it's the University of Georgia in the United States. And I have fond memories of our Phenomenology of Spirit reading group at my house. I think Nastasia, you started a bit later than me. I was your senior in the program somehow, by a year or two or something. It wasn't a real seniority or anything. But I remember lots of wine and enlivened discussions about and frustrations about Hegel's phenomenology. So that was, yeah, very fun memory. So I'm very happy to be able to have you here on our seminar series and to introduce you. Now you're in Brazil and I'm in Hong Kong, and here we are all meeting together. Uh,
Yeah.
Online. Yeah. So let me just mention a couple papers. So she's an expert in Spinoza. Um, just mention a couple papers in English here. Spinoza's argument for bodily imagination. And then there's another paper here that I think is more closely connected in some ways, maybe to the talk today. Monism and individuation and Anne Conway as a critic of Spinoza. So she works on early modern philosophy, uh, women in early modern philosophy. And today the talk is individuation and the continuum of being in Anne Conway. So Nastasia, please take it away. Looking forward to the talk.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Alessandro, for um, inviting me and bearing with me during this year to actually figure out a nice date to present this talk. And thank you, Greg. I think that those readings of the phenomenology of spirit at your house were really part of my like upbringing on philosophy, and it's part of my memories of how philosophy is done better in groups and how it can be fun and formative at the same time. We don't need to be alone and sad to do philosophy. We can be together having fun. So I think this is a revival of those moments, as I hope. So today my talk will be on individuation and the continuum of being in Anne Conway. And I just, for the sake of warm up, I will give you a brief introduction on like why and how Conway. So while I was at the University of Georgia doing my PhD, I had to teach a modern philosophy course, and I was watching Duke University's Project Vox, and I wanted to um, diversify my syllabus and teach women philosophers. That was around 2011, 2013, so a couple of years ago already. And I came across a small book by Margaret Atherton. She made a small collection on women philosophers of the early modern period that would fit really well with a famous collection of essays on rationalists called Readings in Modern Philosophy, Volume 1 by Roger Ariel. And finding out those collections of original works, but in the form of a textbook to actually be able to use it in class was very special for me, because still nowadays I think that teaching and research really come together. And still until today, I use teaching as like a laboratory for ideas, for papers. And so that was the beginning. So I started to teach Spinoza and Conway together, and this ended up in a research on Spinoza's reception in 17th century England. Usually when I study Spinoza, I like to value the works of those scholars that came way before me. So I usually like to find new old stuff. So I usually try to develop the works done by scholars that are either not among us anymore, or that scholars whose research we actually don't value as much. And the reception of Spinoza in 17th century England was something that I could only find two papers on it, one by Rosalind Colley from 1960s and another one by Sarah Hilton on the 80s. And then I kind of used this line, and 40 years later, I came up with a paper on Spinoza and Conway. And I think looking to Conway through Spinoza is Spinoza becomes a nice mirror to understand the intellectual circle that she was into. And we can also, through the scholarship on Spinoza, and understand the England in which Anne Conway was in. So they say that England was armed against atheism at the time, right, in the Protestant Reformation, and Spinoza was someone that was not actually loved by people, usually associated with atheism, as he was a communicant of no church. These are expressions coming from Colley's paper. So I also think it's very interesting to find like connections that gives us clues to do further research. So I think it's very interesting that Spinoza is this communicant of no church, and that he somehow engaged with Quakerism. And there is this article by Richard Popkins from the 80s where he explores this relationship between Spinoza and Samuel Fisher, who was actually a Quaker. And there is this hypothesis that Spinoza helped translate a Quaker pamphlet. And I think this is a nice clue to understand Conway's engagement with Quakerism at the end of her life. So she converted to Quakerism, she and her Dr. von Helmont. So I think these are connections that help us do good kind of philosophical pairing, which is a methodology in the history of philosophy that is not well seen today, because, for example, some of the criticisms that I received in the past was that I was trying to fit Spinoza into Conway's context and not like reading Conway as a philosopher in and of herself, sort of. But I think this is silly kind of criticism, because it all depends on how you use the historical context to make the philosopher, the women philosopher, express herself. So a little bit about Conway, and I hope this is not too simple for those that know her work, but since Conway studies is very meager, there's not a lot of Conway scholars around the world. So she was born in 1631 in London, and she passed away in 79. She was married to a viscount. She was from an aristocratic family, And I think it's an interesting fact of her biography that she was born Anne Finch, and the Finch family owned the Kensington Palace. So she was raised in Kensington Palace. For those who know London, this is a really big estate, beautiful in the middle of London. So it shows like where she's coming from a little bit. Another important biographical fact is that her brother, John Finch, he was a student at Christ College at Cambridge University. And this fact is important because John Finch's professor at Cambridge was Henry Moore. And Finch asked him to teach Conway philosophy. So he accepted. And since women could not attend Cambridge University at that time, um, Henry Moore agreed to give her instruction by letters, so virtually. This correspondence did not survive in totality, but in what we have, we know that part of her curriculum or the basis of her curriculum or their correspondence exchange was Cartesianism, basically. So Cartesianism was the center of Conway's upbringing. And I am putting here a Cambridge Platonist as a question because it is not exactly agreed by everyone that she was a Cambridge Platonist because she was not in Cambridge. So the fact that she could not attend the university and was not a student at Christ College is alone enough for some scholars to consider her out of this circle. Uh, not out of the circle, but out of she doesn't fit the description of being a Cambridge Platonist in the same way as those that are part of the circle. So she was one of them, but not in the same way, because she was receiving instruction by Moore. She was thinking the same questions, but she was not in Cambridge. So I think this is an important methodological question for those who are interested in expanding the canon on how to reconceive the concept or this expression Cambridge Platonists so that Conway can be considered part of it. And just a little bit of her life and work, just because I want to share with you a problem that I currently have when dealing with women philosophers, which is the following. Either we have, because we don't know much, nowadays we know significantly more than we used to in the past about these women philosophers, but since they are largely unknown to the public, even students at the university, usually when we introduce women philosophers, we give a lot of biographical details. Something that we don't do much with regular male philosophers. So I try not to talk much about women's lives to avoid some methodological mistakes that arise when we use biographical information to justify phenomenological philosophical stances or theses. So I think this is very problematic. I don't know how to deal with this, and that's why I'm kind of just sharing with you, just for the sake of putting it out there as a methodological problem that we might have with all other philosophers as well. So, for example, the fact that she was taught by Moore appears as a justification for her philosophical expertise. Yes, he was a professor, but if we read the introduction of Courdet and Course, they are ascribing to him most of her intellectual expertise, which I think takes away from her autonomy and her own, abilities to think philosophically. Another thing that biographical point that I think can be problematic is the fact that she spent her whole life suffering from headaches. And at some point, she becomes this case study for various physicians, including the Flemish Francis Mercury van Helmont, that became her friend and the editor of her book. And sometimes her theory of emotions, if we can extract a theory of emotions from the principles of the most ancient and modern philosophy, which is her treatise, her theory of emotions is somehow justified because of her personal experience with pain through her whole life. I think this is very delicate, and I'm again putting it out there because I don't think that it's very interesting to make these associations, like she suffered, therefore she's putting suffering as a strategic emotion on the path of salvation, which is what she does. So suffering is an emotion that leads to some sort of restoration of the soul, and she gives this special place to suffering. So I again, we should be careful about naturalizing biographical facts as justifications for philosophical stances. So these are her. These are the central works on which one has to go and delve into in order to study Conway. So she wrote this single treatise and lots of letters, right? So the collection of letters, it's have been edited by Marjorie Nicholson and revised by Sarah Hitton, who also wrote a nice biography of Conway. And this treatise, The Principles of Most Ancient and Modern Philosophy, was written along the last 9 years of her life. It was written through a long time and was published anonymously in Amsterdam in 1690s in Latin. However, from the preface, we can see that the original was in English and it was lost. So it's very interesting fact because, I mean, there's a historical strength here because Conway is one of the first philosophers, not women philosophers, but philosophers in general, to actually write in English, not in Latin, which was the vernacular at the time. So the Principia is part of the early English books collections around the world. And the Principia was published anonymously and inside Van Helmont's Opuscula. Just before I move to the next slide, we have here the opening page of Peter Lapsen's bilingual edition, which is another very important source for Conway scholarship. It's interesting, and as usual, reception and text organization and translation and edition and understanding in general usually happens in the same way. So Peter Lapsen constructed this first modern edition of the Principles, and then Codet and Course considered that it was full of mistakes, and then they re-edited the text, redone the translation, and now everyone thinks that Codet and Course translation is terrible, full of mistakes. The notes are very confusing and guide the reader to wrong conclusions about Conway's philosophy. And we have now a translation by Mercer and Jasper Reed that it's under construction. But still, what we have right now are these two. And this is just for fun because I'm very proud that I was able to receive permission by Queen's College Library at the University of Oxford to actually see the first edition. And it was a very an important experience for me because I could actually see the size of Van Helmont's opuscula, and I could see like that the Principles, it's in the middle towards the end of the book, and really it's anonymous. So, you actually you see the evidence in front of you, and you can kind of, yeah, that's right. Something that I didn't take as seriously as I wanted to or as I should have is that the book that comes before the Principia in Van Helmont's Opuscula, actually, Marjorie Nicholson considers that it might have been written by Van Helmont and Conway. So she might have helped him write that work. So she was a collaborator of Van Helmont. And I think this is a fact about her philosophical development that is completely neglected by secondary literature. And seeing those first editions is the only way that we have to actually figure the extent of her philosophical production. So the philosophical problem that I will deal with here, and really, it might be so basic that my goal today is just to be able to talk about it in a way that it makes sense. Okay, this is not a part of a paper that I'm writing. This is just me trying to understand the text with you and kind of sharing with you a reading, an interpretation. So if you know more, please share with me. So the philosophical problem is, how can an individual being at the same time change and remain the same? Okay. It's a general problem, a problem that many philosophers had dealt with before. So I will just share with you how Conway arrives at this problem, right? So again, we are talking about the theory that is in the Principia Philosophicae, okay? Philosophiae. So the metaphysical framework, the work is actually a treatise, and it's very systematic, very traditionally constructed. It starts with the definition of God and goes from God, just like Spinoza's Ethics, it goes from the definition of God and then it moves down to the creatures. So Conway starts by defining God as spirit, light, and life. Okay. All present, all powerful, creator and maker of all things visible and invisible. She's also defining God as an immutable being, and as a being that in which there is no time, change, or division of parts. So in this sense, a very traditional, I would say, definition of God, although I might say that I see a, a, a very important um, evidence here from what I will construct and show towards the end of my talk, that comes from this definition of God as spirit, light, and life. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then she moves on to define the creatures, but as all philosophers that are dealing with the one and many problem in metaphysics, right? She cannot construct a consistent picture of unity and plurality just by defining God as immutable and creatures as mutable, right? So she's facing this very traditional difficulty when we conceive of God as an entity that is somehow separate and prior to plurality and individual beings. And she's trying to make a consistent and cohesive thesis. And for this to work, she considers that there should be a mediator, something in between God and the creatures. and this mediator she names as Christ. So in her metaphysical view, we have this tripartite division of being, right? We have God, we have Christ, and we have the creatures. So it's there. Christ is the mediator between God and the creatures, and such a being is of a lesser nature than God, but of a greater and more perfect nature than all remaining creatures, right? So some would say that instead of solving the one and many problem, she makes it more complex because she puts a mediator in a very specific mediator, which is Christ. But this is actually supposed to solve the problem because Christ is this first creature. So it encompasses in him shared characteristics somehow between God and the creatures, because his existence precedes that of all other creatures. And in this sense, remember the metaphor of flight. In this sense, he is closer to God in perfection than the other creatures that came after him. So remember that Conway, maybe that's the moment where I should say this, that Conway, as a Cambridge Platonist, she's very much influenced by Origen, Proclus, Plotinus, and if it were not for Dr. Bryant, I wouldn't be able to understand Conway at all, because I had some courses in Proclus and Plotinus with her. So the scholarship considers this tripartite division of being as a Neoplatonic stance, where being is some sort of structured as a spectrum. And that's why the metaphor of light is so important, because God is the source of light, and life is created as if, in the same way that we see a beam of light fading out, losing strength, and creating shades, shadows, and darkness. So she considers that the relationship between God, Christ, and creatures can be explained through this idea of a gradual single spectrum of light that is either feeble or bright in intensity. Okay. But light is also goodness. So if we take this to be like the most basic concepts of her metaphysics, reality for Anne Conway has perfection and goodness and light as a structuring principle, right? So reality is structured by light, God, perfection. So this is a part of the argument where she's kind of proving the existence of Christ as a mediator, because she wants to argue that although Christ is the first man, is share perfection with God, he cannot be God, as God is God, and he's not creatures as creatures are creatures. So she's sort of showing here in this paragraph this division of beings through their different levels of perfection. And here is where the principle of individuation comes about, right? So the question of what is it that makes an individual an individual, different from everything else, and a singular being. It is because we have this tripartite division of being that we can understand individuation, that we can go from one to many and understand many as some kind of emanation from the one, right? So, and just a parenthesis here, Conway is also using Spinoza's expressions. Of course, other philosophers use these expressions as well, but I think it's very interesting that when she wants to her argument, she gives arguments and she uses logic to show that a certain view is wrong. So because this is she says something, things like that, because this is a contradiction, then this shouldn't follow, etc. But then when she wants to go back to real life, she always uses these expressions. Daily experience teaches us. And Spinoza is all the time kind of moving from experience, from theory to experience by using this expression. And I think this is very significant. She's also using like daily experience teaches us. Let's look to the world and do philosophy from what we see and experience. Close parentheses. So she is using change, the ability to change, as a justification for individuation, right? Because God is immutable. Christ changes only for the good. Christ is this being that can only approach to God. And creatures are different insofar as they can mutate towards the good and away from the good, right? So that's the difference. And this in change and the direction of change, I think direction of change is very important here, is what individuates things with respect to the different levels of being. Okay. So here, creatures are able to change from good to good as well as from good to evil. Okay. So again, she continues. She finishes the justification for the distinction of the tripartite division of beings, and then she moves on to talk about individual beings in the realm of creatures. So the fact that creatures are mutable in respect to their natures, and the difference between God and creatures, that is, if God is immutable and creatures are mutable, is demonstrated by daily experience. Again, she using this expression again. So a creature is mutable in as much as it is a creature. So it's part of the nature of being an individual to be mutable. And then the question that connects with the philosophical problem slide that I opened my talk with, she wants to know about the extent of this mutability. So she's interested in knowing how far we can change.
Sorry, Nastasia, can I ask
Yes.
a very brief question? When she talks about creatures, does she only mean living beings or all things created,
All
so to
things
say?
created.
All
All
things
things.
created. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And I will. I should tell you where she's going with this at the end of my talk. And if I forget, I don't think I will forget, but she has a very different, weird, interesting um, conception of being and non-being inside the realm of creatures, living beings and non-living beings. Okay, she considers the difference between living and non-living beings as a matter of degree. Again, why? Because life, the metaphor of light and light, I think I use this metaphor as an explanatory key for a lot of the workings inside Conway's of 3Ts. So it's everything is a matter of degree, not a matter of difference in substance or nature in the strongest sense. So then she starts by again entertaining some arguments to figure out the extent of the mutability of beings, right? And I think this is the hardest part because she's going to entertain arguments that later on she will reject. So I think that this first batch of arguments, she is dealing with hypotheses coming from other philosophies, right? And then she's using them to sort of construct her own theory. So we should bear in mind that sometimes she's putting together an argument that is just a transition to the construction of her own argument and theory. So she's not agreeing with it. It's just a theoretical maneuver. So again, remember that in the first chapter or the first three chapters, she is putting together this tripartite division of beings and perfection as this structuring principle of reality. She is conceiving of degrees of perfection and using this as a background. She's now able to ask, how can one being one individual change into something else, into another? And she starts by saying that it's impossible for this change to take place. Because if one individual being would change into another, this would cause great confusion, not only for the creatures, for us experiencing reality, but also for God. Because it would be impossible for God to punish and reward the actions of people, right? So she gives the example of Paul changing into Judas, Judas changing into Paul. One has seen, the other has not. So if one changes into the other, the righteous man would not receive the reward of his virtue. And she thinks this is it cannot happen. It would be a confusion that would not suit the wisdom of God, right? But then she says, she uses this argument and this example to show that, therefore, it's not the substance of Paul that changes into the individual substance of Peter. This cannot happen. The individual substances or the individual essences cannot change into another. Otherwise, you will lose track of identifying one individual, right? You lose track of identity. So you cannot change essence. essences cannot change. And then she uses Alexander cannot change into Darius, and Darius cannot change into his own horse, Bucephalus, right? And then it's interesting because now Bucephalus is a non-human being. A horse is going to become the example, right? So the first example was the apostles, friends of Christ, so very holy people, or those that are part of the narrative or the scriptures. And now Bucephalus, a horse, and she's using it as an example. So now she's asking, like, if we know that one individual essence cannot change into another, we should know how many essences there are and how many substances there are. And I think this is really hard moment in the argument, because she's now arguing against the idea that an individual is completely constrained and confined within the boundaries of his self, his own identity, whether this identity is as an individual or as a species. If an individual were completely constrained and confined in itself, he or she would not be able to change into something else. So she's clearly arguing against a concept of atomic individual, right? But an atomic individual could not attain perfection, could not become better. So there is an argument here for relationality, right? As creatures, we are related, and as related, we can only change towards the better or towards evil. Outside of ourselves, right? Being and becoming with others, right? And this is sort of she's also associating this relationality with the idea of Christ. Christ is a mediator, but is also that thing which relates God and creatures. So it's the relation. Christ is the relationship between the one and the many. And Christ for her, and I'm anticipating this, I don't know whether it will come later on. Christ is logos. Christ is word. So there is word, relation, communication. There is some kind of communication between God and creatures, and this is what Christ is. And again, this is an indication of her metaphysics of relationality. And then that's okay. We've gone through the individuation principle, and now she has to show to what extent, so what individuates people, which is mutability, and the fact that they are not atomic in themselves, they are relational, they are in relation with each other, and that's the only way we can change towards the better or towards the worse. Now she needs to show us how this transmutation process happens. She talks about metamorphosis. She talks about transmutation, and really she's sort of using Ovidian language here, just like Spinoza uses. And again, she brings back a horse, and I think it's very interesting because when the argument for transmutation is she's using a non-human individual to talk about transmutation. And here, this paragraph is very interesting because it's like not a slippery slope, but a slope, because it starts with imagine a horse. Think about a horse. Again, this is interesting because imagination plays a nice role here. Imagine a horse. If this horse is doing is acting his best, is doing whatever his owner asks of him, and he's the best possible horse, he should be able to become more. This is an indication of his mutability and of his perfection, and the glory of the attributes should shine more. So he should receive rewards for being a good horse. And if this horse dies and becomes dead matter, I mean, she's saying it cannot be dead matter. It cannot. If when the horse dies, it shouldn't be dead matter. Otherwise, it would be just a machine. But a horse acts towards the good. He can be a good horse. So there is a direction of perfection. The horse is perfecting himself. So this non-human creature is not a machine, is not that matter, even when dead. And it has to, since God is infinitely good, and the horse acted towards the good, it should be that the horse will become a better horse after he dies. So he will have to return to life as a better horse. And then look at the end of the paragraph. So that it becomes a horse as it was before, but stronger and more beautiful, and with a better spirit than before. Excellent. If it dies a second, third, and fourth time, so things die many times, it will always remain a horse, even though it becomes a continuous. And then this is a question, sorry. If it dies a second, a third, a fourth time, does it always remain a horse, even though it becomes continuously better and more excellence? And how often its spirit shall return? And then again, she's saying, obviously, daily experience is teaching us that species change into one and another, right? Air into fire, war into air, earth into water. So she goes even down to non-living things. She's using stones, water into stones as well. And she's arguing that let no one say that metals are only bare bodies and have no spirit. So every living thing is part of this light life, is alive. So it's a vitalist metaphysics, right? So she's rambling on how worms change into flies and etc. And this for her is an indication, is an evidence that God's judgment and God's grace is in action. So the change from one individual or one individual species or one individual being into another is an indication that God's judgment prevails and etc. It's the path of restoration of creatures towards the infinite good. The answer to that question of does the horse always remain a horse should be no. A horse should be able to change into a human being, and a human being into an angel or whatever. Right. So again, transmutation of one species into another is how the justice of God shines gloriously, and etc. How it operates not only in human beings and angels, but also in creatures. So after this transmutation argument, she has to reconsider the traditional division between matter and spirit. And I'm almost finishing here. Because remember, when she was using the example of Paul and Judas, she was considering the change of individual essences and individual substances from within a traditional metaphysical perspective where matter individuates and form perhaps an Aristotelian version of it, and the form is what is more general, and what individuates is matter. But then if one matter changes into another, how can you track the existence of the individual given that the form is undifferentiated? So she has to reconsider the traditional division between matter and spirit, and we should ask ourselves whether she's successful when she's offering her alternative picture. So I am not, I guess I have to talk about this very slowly because it's very complex and might be confusing. So I take a lot of time to talk about very specific and things. But I also don't want to like take too long here because I think I don't know how much time I still have, but I've been speaking for a long time and I want to hear from you. But what she does is to conceive that the difference between body and spirit, matter and spirit and mind and intellect, is not a distinction of essence. It's not essential. It's only of mode, right? So again, and I think this is where she's going wild. I think this is very, very wild because she's claiming that body can turn into spirit and vice versa. So that's her conclusion. So, that bodies can change and go from being a brute body to a very angelic body. So the proportion, and I'll use here Spinozistic language, she doesn't use exactly the word proportion. Um, I think she uses the word order. The proportion of the amount of spirit, the proportion between spirit and matter in a being changes. So matter can become more rarefied, less dense, and turn into spirit. And again, this idea of matter and spirit being part of the single spectrum of being and not two different substances, for example. So it's a single substance. Again, here, the distinction between spirit and body is only modal, not essential or substantial. Spirit is able to become more or less corporeal in many degrees, but not to infinity. Spirits can remain for a long period, etc. And I guess this should have come later. So in the composition of being, she's saying here that the relationship between body and spirit, they kind of penetrate each other. She has an explanation for the transmutation of matter into spirit, how it happens, and etc. She uses gender images to talk about body and spirit. She uses love as a principle of change, of vital action. but she organizes the individual as a multitude of bodies and spirits that have like a central and principal ruler. So she kind of restructures, and again, like Spinoza, an individual is composed of parts, and these parts sort of act towards a single goal, forming an individual unity, where we have this principal ruler, which is the essence, sort of organizing all parts of an individual. And that's Conway. And I think I wanted to, I put this here. I actually didn't know exactly what to do with it, but I think because the title of this section, this session of talks is being singular, and because of Hegel in the background, I found out this paragraph, and I think this conclusion, and I think this is a place that I should return to understand better what it is, but maybe we have enough already to understand. So she's saying, she's characterizing being as merely a logical term and concept, which logicians call the most general genus, and which, as a bare and abstract notion, does not exist in things themselves, but only as a concept in the human mind. For this reason, she's a nominalist about being. For this reason, every being has an individual nature with ascertainable attributes. So she's saying that, I think the sentence that came before it is also very important. God has created no bare being which can be predicated of it. So I think at the end, she is offering this monism. So there is a tripartite division of being. An individual does not have its essence doesn't change, but the conclusion is that there might be I don't know, maybe I'm being wild here. There's only this single essence, which is spirit, life, and light, that we all share. But we do share, not as a concept. This is not a concept in our mind. This is all instantiated by nature. And then she becomes like this very Spinozistic. I at least see this very Spinozistic metaphysics, because at the end, there is just this single beam of light that is instantiated, right, with matter in it. Anyway, so yeah, that's it. I will stop here.
Thanks so much, Nastasia. Yeah, this was a great introduction for me to Conway. Yeah, I have lots of questions, but I will defer to the group first. Who has questions? Please just either raise your virtual hand. Okay, I see David Harmon. Is that correct? Is that? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nastasia. That was a lot of fun. So I have a couple of questions, but I'll just stick to one for the moment. And I wonder, I wrestle with this quite a bit in Conway. And that the quote that you shared just there at the end has thrown me for a loop. For some reason, I've never noticed it before. But I wonder, what she's got to have multiple spirits, obviously, right? But how those spirits can be differentiated from one another is confusing. Of course, they can be differentiated by their sort of accidents. But given her discussion of Peter, Paul, and Judas, it seems like we want to say something, none of their accidents are permanent. So we should want to be able to distinguish them essentially, but we can't do that because there are only three non-nominal essences, right? So then that pushes me in the hexaity direction to say that they each have a thisness. And I wonder if that final quote motivates you to think the same thing.
Hi, David. Thank you for listening and thank you for your question. So what do you mean by the same thing, right? So you said two different things, I think. One, that we have to accept that there are multiple spirits in Conway, and there are only 3 non-nominal essences. Can you say a little bit more about that? I don't know what I'm not sure whether I actually understand how you see the nature of spirit.
Right. Well, I guess I'm taking it for granted that there are multiple spirits, given that she talks about she says things like, oh, this one has a principal spirit and this spirit is more corporeal or something like that. So I guess I'm taking it for granted. But I mean, there may be reasons against doing that. But the reason I take her to be, I think she's a nominalist about all essences except for God, Christ, and creatures. Simply because those are the only sort of boundaries that can't be crossed. But maybe I'm taking too much.
No, I
out of that.
agree with you that she is being a nominalist about all essences, and perhaps she's using the word spirit equivocally. So when she says that there are multiple spirits, what she's actually saying is that there are multiple individuals, multiple creatures individualized with a different proportion between matter and spirit, but spirit itself is one.
Okay. Right.
So I would have this reading of an equivocal use of the concept of spirit. It means different things in different moments, but spirit itself is one. It has to be one. And it's only, and the boundaries, the difference between the 3 beings or the 3 spirits, they're not 3 spirits. I don't think there are 3 spirits. I think they're one spirit moving in, either not moving or moving into different directions. So I don't even think that there are 3 spirits. There's just one spirit. And the boundaries that there are among the parts of spirit are boundaries related to their capacity to move or remain still. So
Okay. So, and then just one quick follow-up. The boundaries themselves that sort of give us, I don't know, the nominal individuals that we talk about, do you want to spell those out in terms of like parts of creation or in terms of modes of creation?
I would say modes of creation.
Modes. Okay.
It should not be predicated off. I think we should go back to that being. There is no bare being. Being is logical concept in the minds of human beings. Every being is individuated. So I think we shouldn't talk about part whole relationship, but modes, but within this context of a doctrine of gradualism. I'm not sure. I don't like the word doctrine, but within this interpretation key of gradation. So there is one spirit, there is one real being, and we can differentiate its modes through the way that they move.
Great. Thank you.
Direction of motion. You're welcome.
Okay.
This is very hard.
Suresh, you have the next question?
Yeah, so I have it follows from what David said, I think, and it concerns the last part when she says that I think she's making a difference between, differentiating between God and being. So I'm asking, I mean, isn't being, the way it is conceived generally, can we read at her God as being? I mean, is it not being that she's describing when she's talking about God? And so, yeah, my question is, I mean, can we read her God as being? because I know that traditionally as it has been conceived by philosophers. So yeah, I mean, if you say something on that, then I might have a follow-up.
I think, as I read, I think there is just one being, and this being is light, life, spirit, one true being, right? One true being, which is pure spirit, but this true being appears as different creatures, appears individuated as a plurality. Depending on how they move or whether they move or not. Okay. So being, as in the same way that I think that she's using spirit equivocally, being is a notion, a logical notion, as she herself puts it, that can be applied to very different things, but according to her, never without being instantiated, right? Never without the word here is with certain ascertainable attributes. So being always has
So
attributes.
if we say that being is necessarily always differentiated and attributed and individuated, then she won't have a problem with using the word being as a synonym for God. Am I
Yeah,
getting it right?
exactly.
Okay.
But this is
And
not
the
but
only
this is not something that she starts with. You know, she arrives at this conclusion by criticizing some concepts of matter, some concepts of spirit, some concepts of essence and God and substance. So I think her conclusion is very Spinozistic in the sense that there is a single God that has attributes, and the individuals are the modes of these attributes. I think the conclusion is very similar, but she is not stating it at first. She's kind of arriving there from different I don't know, using a different argumentative strategy. And because in some sense, she doesn't want to identify God and nature. She doesn't want to identify God and nature. She wants to say that God is a part, is something else, is a different kind of being. But at the same time, creatures and Christ can only be understood in their natures by appeal to a notion of God that is just emanating its own attributes, its own characteristics. So she doesn't want to say that God is nature, but she wants to say that nature is God. I don't know. Maybe there's this difference. Okay. She doesn't want to say that God is nature, but she wants to say that nature is God.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think she's able to solve without problems. I mean, it's some kind of paradoxical monism. I think that this is, I mean, she wants to explain the Trinity, so explain reality using the Trinity. If paradox is not part of it, I don't know. would not She would not have used the Trinity to, because the Trinity is a paradox. A being cannot be God and human at the same time, right? Christ is a paradox. He's both man and God. And I think this is, she wants to keep it in her metaphysics. I don't know.
No, it's just cool. Thank you.
Okay, Matthias.
Hi, Anastasia. Thank you for your
Matheus, tudo bem?
presentation. Tudo. Thank you for your presentation, Anastasia. Very interesting. I have two quick questions here, and the first question is just to help me understand better. Does Conway present like a reason for such a change in this universe? Is there a reason for this necessarily, or is she just stating that, hey, this is the universe and there is change in the universe?
So, okay, good question. Thank you. I don't think that Conway is a super ultra rationalist like De La Rocca considers Spinoza to be. Like there is a principle of sufficient reason. There's always a reason for everything. Again, that's why I think she keeps the mystery of the Trinity, the metaphysics. There has to be some kind of thing that blows our mind and we cannot understand. Okay, she's a Neoplatonist. So there is a reason for change. There is a reason for change. And the nature, it is of our nature to change. Creatures is of the nature of creatures to change. So that's one metaphysical reason. Another is since we are part of God, I'm not going to use the word part. Since we are, and now I'm using Spinoza's vocabulary, but since we are modes of the attributes of God, since we are light in the same sense that God is light, we are spirit in the same sense that God is spirit, and this spirit is organized according to a structure of perfection because nature is perfect. Then we change because we are built to acquire more perfection. But we are not built as well as Christ was built. So we can move away from perfection. We can make mistakes. And I think that the question is not exactly what is the reason for change, because this is sort of a fact by experience. But more like, how can we change for better? I think that's the interesting question, because then we can come back to, she has an answer for that, right? How we can change for better. She has an ethics sort of related to our emotions, right? Depending on how we understand suffering, depending on how we understand love. She understands emotion as this transmission of vital action. There's a way that we should use words, because since Christ is logos prophorikos, and logos osios, it's the source of logos, and it's that which speaks. We should be able to speak wisely, goodly, perfectly. So we should be prophets with quotes, right? We should be able to speak the good word. We should be able to speak what's right. And I think this is the path to change for her, right? Is always the good change is towards acquiring a more spiritual being. We become more spiritual, not because matter is sinful or something we should go against, but because matter is just a moment of transformation of that which is, right?
Okay, thank you. Can I do a follow-up of that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so that's the follow-up is basically, you mentioned that love is like a principle of change and vital energies. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, I know it's the topic that interests you. So there's a lot on love on Conway, and I think it's a great topic to be pursued, Mateus, because most of scholars have just worked on suffering, and they overemphasize the role of suffering in this transmutation of beings. But she talks about sympathetic relationships and how it is through sympathy, similarity between beings, and the love that arises from seeing something that is something that is similar to you, and how this transforms. So I have one research that it's very hard to do, but I presented a paper once in Oxford on how the way that we represent God changes us. So again, there is an image of Christ as an image of God. right? And we have this image in us somehow. So the way that we represent God and the way that we relate with this representation is a major source of change. So I think this is where it's about ethics and epistemology that follows from this metaphysics. So love is a very, very rich emotion that leads to perfection and goodness and greater changes in being.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, David, you had another question or follow-up?
Yeah, sorry. This is a very quick follow-up on the point about whether or not she's a rationalist. I agree that she there's a rationalist vibe about her, but it's not. She's very clearly not straightforwardly a rationalist. And I thought your point about the sort of mysticism is a good one, and also your points about how many times she appeals to experience is good evidence against that as well. But I just wanted to bring up in 1651 she sent a letter to her father-in-law. So she's only like 19 at the time, but she says straightforwardly, experience is the mother of all knowledge. So this gives us evidence at least against the rationalist, straightforward rationalist reading, at least. That's all.
Great, thank you. I think that the letters really enrich our understanding of Conway. And there is one letter that is my favorite. I think it's a letter with more. I don't remember the recipient. I know the content, and I'll share with you. So she decides to hire a Quaker maid to help her, and someone is trying to convince her that she shouldn't have a Quaker maid. And then she says she's a good person because they know whatever. And then at the end, she puts a question that I think it's very, very informative of the problems that she's dealing with. Like, how can we distinguish? How can we distinguish between true inspiration, enthusiasm, and melancholy? I think this is so beautiful because, who are you to say that the Quaker woman is not really inspired and it's just, entertaining a false god? And am I being truly inspired when I'm writing this, or am I just being melancholic about my own situation? So I think it's a very interesting letter on how, like, she's not exactly a rationalist, because otherwise she would have a principle that would be able to distinguish between these three different states. There's some kind of mixture between knowledge and lack thereof. We don't know, we don't have the right criteria to ascribe. So there is some skepticism about our abilities to know for sure. And it's Popkin who says that the Cambridge Platonists are a third force in the 17th century. So they are not rationalists, they are not empiricists, they are a third force. And I like this idea of third force. He doesn't say they are mystics, but there is something else going on there that is related to her ecumenism, the way that she gets very different doctrines and try to make up one single doctrine for all monotheist religions. Her eclecticism that speaks to it, like the influence of alchemy and Protestantism and philosophy. So yeah, some kind of mystic, but a rationalist, empiricist mystic, a third force.
Okay, maybe I don't see a hand up, so maybe I will. Oh, actually, I'll give the floor to Alex first, and then I will go last. So Alex.
No, please, Greg.
Oh,
If you
okay.
prefer to go last, otherwise, no, please go
I
on.
don't
I
mind
can
going
wait.
first. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much. Maybe I have three questions, and maybe I try to ask them. I think they're related. Um, The first question is just maybe about the view of Christ here and its relation to maybe more orthodox views of Christ. And because it seems that for Conway, the Son of God was created, right? So Christ is created. And I think the standard Orthodox view is that Christ is begotten, not made, right? So the Council of Nicaea, it's very important that Christ is begotten. So Christ is begotten, that means Christ is the same nature as God the Father. And when something's made, it means that it doesn't necessarily have the same nature as the maker, right? So that Council of Nicaea wanted to draw that distinction between Christ and creation. And so I'm wondering whether her view of Christ is seems heterodox in a really important way. So despite the reliance on Trinity, it seems like in some ways a heterodox view. Um, so that's my first just general question about her relationship to kind of standard theology, which would take Christ not as something created. Um, and my related to this is my question about Quakerism, because I myself am a Quaker, so I was actually pretty excited to hear this, and I can see how her metaphysics may lend itself to this in the end. I mean, talking about so one of the things Quakers talk about is that of God in everyone, and so this idea that there's that of God in everyone, talk about the inward light, inward spirit, and this kind of thing. So this metaphysics of the kind of one substance or the one spirit uh, lends itself in some way to this idea. So I was just wondering if you could speak to the connection between the metaphysics here of the kind of monism of spirit and this Quaker conversion that she takes, especially on the ethical side, which you've been speaking to. Because one of the unique features of Quakerism is the peace testimony. I mean, they're basically opposed to violence, all kinds. They're radical egalitarians, right? There's no difference between the laity and the priests, right? So egalitarians and committed to nonviolence, right, in radical forms. So uh, I'm really curious about this. And I think traditionally part of the idea of that of God in everyone is that to commit acts of violence against another person is to commit acts of violence against God himself. And so it makes sense to me that this would be an avenue for her. But I'm just curious, maybe you could speak to that. I have a third question, but it's about a different topic. So let me just stick with the Christian related themes for now. And then after Alex's question, maybe we'll come back around to it. So thanks so much.
Nice. Thank you, Greg. I think I'm always learning because when you go to 17th century metaphysics, as you know, with only the instruments and resources of philosophy, you might miss a lot, because it's not merely a metaphysical problem that she's dealing with in the contemporary philosophical sense, as like a intellectual puzzle with respect to the grounds of reality. It's a theological problem as well, and a political problem, very clearly a political problem. She wants to offer the basis of unified religion, right? That we would unite the Christians, the Jews, and she calls the Turks, which positions her very well as someone who doesn't know much about Islam. She just calls them the Turks. So anyway, I wish I knew theology more to give a better answer to you, but I would have to go back to the text to better understand whether Christ is begotten, not made, because Christ is of the same nature of God. And I remember that she says that she uses the metaphor of a builder, that a house we can say that a house was created by an inventor. but this kind of creation is completely different. It's not the kind of creation that God made, because the house is not of the same nature of the inventor. So we cannot, that's not that's not the sense of creation that she's talking about. It's something else. But she doesn't, I don't know, maybe I should use the specific lenses of Orthodox versus heterodox view of Christ in Christianity to see whether I find clues to, with certainty, say that she has this notion of begotten and not created. But definitely, she's not understanding created in the same sense that creation has when we talk about the invention of a house.
Yeah.
She's talking about the same nature. And there's this whole translation thing. We should go to the Latin, her Latin. She wrote in English, the manuscript was lost, but the Latin 1619 version is so rich. It's very important to actually look at the Latin. And following on the same kind of path of me not knowing standard theology, me not knowing Quakerism from experience, I wish I knew more. I mean, I think that's why these kinds of experiences of like discussing with other people from other areas. I mean, other areas. We both do metaphysics, 19th century Hegel, 17th century. But I mean, it's important. So I think it's a topic to be pursued, the question of Quakerism in Conway, because since the treatise was written through the last 9 years of her life, and she converted to Quakerism in the last 2. But at the same time, so the scholarship says that she didn't know Spinoza as well. And this is something that bothers me a lot. Why you're saying that? And Spinoza's Ethics was published in 77. She died in 79. Her book was published in 1690. So, but although the Ethics was only published in 1670, I mean, people were talking about Spinoza's criticism of Descartes and Spinoza's theological political views, right? So, this is another layer of interpretation of the text, which is and another evidence that she could have. There's a high probability that she knew about Spinoza's arguments, regardless of whether having read or not the Ethics, is the fact that the chapter against Spinoza is the last one. So it would be interesting to see if we could map temporally the text. It would be really nice to see what kind of development she has done when she converted to Quakerism. But this work has not been done, right? Like when she wrote which part. What we know is that she converted to Quakerism with Van Helmont, her physician. So they both converted, and her book is inside his book, which, as I said in the beginning, we don't know yet how much she wrote or contributed to his opuscula, to the other works that are in this book of Van Helmont. So it would be interesting to see how Quakerism is there, what changes. There's a lot of information on the letter. I mean, a lot. There's some information on the letters. But what we know is that at this point, when she converted to Quakerism, she broke up with Cambridge Platonists. So I think it's also interesting to see how Cudworth's view are present and Henry Moore's view are present perhaps in the first part of the treatise, and how she moves away from the Cambridge Platonists' view on the nature of the relationship between God and the creatures on the last part of the book. So maybe I'm offering a path here, but it's still lot of work to
Yeah,
do.
that's really interesting because it sounds like there would be a path to map, and then yeah, how we read the text might also change a bit, right? So whether we see it as continuous from beginning to end, or whether we see it as transforming, as her life and her own conversion did. So that's actually, yeah, it makes things even more complicated, but may also give a new interpretive lens to read the whole thing. Um, yeah, and I mean, even the ecumenical aspect that you've been mentioning, that's something Quakers are really famous for, is the ecumenical aspect of things, not being focused on dogma and exclusion. So this ecumenical side also makes a lot of sense, actually. Maybe I just briefly ask my last question because it's related to everything being continuous, this continuity from high to low. It's connected to the Neoplatonism thing and the transformation idea, which I think is really fascinating. This transfer that you talked about the horse being able to transform into the human, or the human then into the angel. So I was wondering because in the again this I don't mean it to be too theology heavy here, but like in the pseudo Dionysus, or the kind of fifth century kind of the if you go back to the kind of origin of Christian mysticism, there's this whole tradition of theosis, so of divinization. So the progress is measured by your proximity to the divine, right? So you're undergoing a process of becoming theosis, right? And I'm just curious, what's the what's the apex of the human development can we really participate through this moral improvement, and through this um, um, kind of, I don't know, maybe the latter is the wrong metaphor, but through this ascent, to use the vertical metaphor, um, like in Greek Orthodoxy, people talk about, say, participating in God's energies, or can we participate in God's nature itself, or do we have a limit, like we never reach this? This is like in a gulf never crossed, right? Um, yeah, so that's and then, like, is there like a low end? Like for Plotinus, he has, I think, like pure matter, which is evil. I think you already indicated that's probably not the view. So I'm wondering on like the it's spirit all the way somehow. It's one being, but how far can we go? Um, yeah,
It's
can we speak of
interesting.
theosis? Can we speak of divinization? Because in a way we already are, but in another way we're also becoming more
Mhm.
divine at the same time.
Again, it's something that we should go back to the text
Yeah.
to so I can show you exactly what is there. She wants to say that we can go higher as Christ minus one,
I see. That's nice.
a little bit less than Christ.
Okay.
Never
Never
we
the
become
mediator of
Christ.
sinners. I see.
But
Okay.
at the same time, it's always a little bit more than that matter, because there is never pure that matter.
I see.
So there's always spirit, there's always life. We change, but we still cannot become completely undifferentiated and
Yeah.
dissolve into the higher spirit, which I think it's interesting why she doesn't allow it. It
Yeah.
seems to be arbitrary, because if we follow from
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
we should be able to just become undifferentiated at some point, in some kind of Buddhist sense. And here I'm thinking about Alex Douglas, David's former supervisor,
Yeah.
Alex Douglas' book on Against Identity, where he's reading Spinoza with Chuang Tzu, I think, and sort of showing how undifferentiation and dissolution of identity, it's actually some kind of ethical principle.
Yeah.
Somehow.
I see.
So
Okay.
I don't think why we wouldn't go there, other than arbitrariness or some kind of political stance where we cannot become like Christ, because otherwise she would have to say that we can become like Christ, and this is too strong a position, or we can become like God, and we can return to God. But she is offering a metaphysics of restoration of souls, and that we all return to the source, kind of thing. But she doesn't explicitly say. She
That's a
wants
helpful.
to say less we.
That's a helpful contrast with philosophers like Meister Eckhart, who talk about the you detach and you lose the individuality, and then in the dark night of the soul, in the becoming like a virgin, you give birth to Christ in the soul, and then but then Eckhart gets in trouble for saying things like, "I am the one and only begotten Son." And you can also say that as well if you've undergone this process. So your individuality is somehow regained, but now it's divinized. And anyway, you get in big trouble for the stuff like that. So yeah, it's very helpful in distinguishing her and her Neoplatonist aspects and putting her on the Neoplatonist map. Yeah, thanks so much. Alex, sorry, I took a little extra time, but please go for it.
Yeah, no worries, Greg. No, thank you, Nastasia. Actually, maybe the first question is, I have a few questions, but maybe the best way to ask the first one is precisely with connection to this last discussion. So if I understand well, so mine is basically a vocabulary question. So I'm very interested in this modal distinction and not essential distinction. And if I understand well, so there is so to say, at least a theoretical explanation of why we cannot become like Christ, which is that I think at the beginning of the text you showed us, there was this expression, the word Christ and creatures are distinct, they are not separated, so to say. There was something like that. So maybe it concerned the relationship between God and the Word. But I think that maybe that's the difference. I mean, like there is a distinction of essence between creatures on one side, Christ on the other side, and God on the other, which is why we cannot change in that respect. Whereas everything else is a modal distinction. And I want to ask you first of all whether that's the case. So there are three things, so to say. There are three essences. I don't know how to state that, or at least three distinction in essence, so to say, and then everything else is just a modal difference. But I do not. I wanted to know what the source is for this notion of mode, because I mean, is it Spinoza? Is it something else? And does it only concern the relationship between body and spirit, or can it also be a way to individuate between different individuals? So I want to come back to the problem of individuation. Like, could we say that we are individuated modally, but not essentially? So is that maybe the kind of thing we are discussing? So that is maybe the first question. Then there's another, but maybe the second one is has to do with this, because I was reflecting about what David said about Conway's rationalism, and I'm always reminded of what Maria Rosa Antognazza said once. Look, like this word rationalism always seems to imply more problems than it actually solves, so to say. And I think that one issue is, or at least one way of understanding rationalism. I'm very much interested in Baumgarten's philosophy. So in post-Leibnizian rationalism, for instance, is the question of the continuity of being, so to say, the chain of being, so to say. And it seems here that there is an odd mix of continuity and discontinuity. So another way maybe of asking this question is, and maybe since this is before Leibniz, it doesn't even make sense to talk about. I mean, I don't know how much rationalist there is. I'm not. It's not my expertise field. But there is an odd mix between a discontinuity between beings and the continuity between creatures, so to say. So on one level, there is this continuity. On another level, there is a continuity. And I think what makes it so interesting is that both are present in some way. So I wanted to ask you whether it makes sense. And yeah, maybe this is a new way of asking the Spinoza question, but like how much Spinoza is into this, because I mean, this has also to do with the question of rationalism, because, for instance, I don't know, in the way how the term rationalism was introduced in the debate in the late 18th century, like if you read Jacobi, for instance, Jacobi did not think of Spinoza as a rationalist. So this is maybe also another way of reading, of dealing with the problem, so to say. But yeah, so my main question really concerns this problem of the modal difference. So does it only apply to spirit and body? Does it also allow us to individuate between creatures? And is it, so to say, right that, uh, so to say, aside from this modal difference, there is an essence difference between Christ, Word, and God, so to say?
So I will start with a detour. I think that every time we recover a woman philosopher with the kind of untraditional views that Conway has, we are sort of able to read with other lenses the canonical philosopher. So I completely agree with you that it's another way of putting the Spinoza question, which we can just say that it's Anne Conway's question, right? We don't need to put Spinoza into the picture, but it's interesting when we do, because we can kind of change Spinoza's reception. We can better understand the various ways that Spinoza's philosophy was read and can be read nowadays, right? I think that's the concept of mode and substance is these are concepts that are used all the time in the 17th century. She read a lot of Hobbes, but as I said in the beginning, the basis of her intellectual formation for upbringing was Cartesianism. So she was definitely dealing with this change in the university curriculum that Cartesianism was the cause of, right? So I think the concepts come from there. And with respect to the metaphysical question, I think it's the question. That's the problem. How can she at the same time have this tripartite division of being while being is one? In which sense can we say that there are individual essences or essences in plural at all? In which sense there is just one single big enormous essence in the Parmenidean sense, like a single being, and everything else it's just a mode, a way of looking. I think that's what I again I like to entertain the idea of a paradox. That's difficulty. So I think that in one sense she is arguing for a single essence, a single being, but in another sense, at the level that's the strategy to read Spinoza as well. At the level of creatures, at the level of individuals, there is individuation. There are various individual essences. We are different from one another, but at the level of God, there is just one big thing. So I think she's playing with this difficulty by offering a way to engage with this problem that is liberatory. I don't know. I think at the end, she's offering an ethics, a way to deal with reality with differences, with sin and suffering, that that is interesting, that is helpful. Without actually, you know, I don't think she's even interested in completely solving the paradox. That's the point, again, against rationalism and empiricism being like the third force. I think she somehow entertains it. She perhaps politically she cannot come down to the bottom of it and say there's just one thing. But maybe that's also the limit of her philosophy. I mean, I don't know. I didn't exactly answer you. I'm just kind of maintaining with you the question, keeping the question alive, because I think this is we should leave this we should leave this talk thinking one essence. What does it mean to have a plurality of, to be dealing with a plurality of essences, and what change does it make in our cognition of the world to think that there is just one essence and we share essences? What does it mean? And I think this is a question that I want to leave open.
I think it's
But
nice. I mean,
share
we've
an
been
essence.
talking about the problem of one and many, and then this kind of paradox has come up a lot. So I think it's very nice that you that you're addressing it. Alex, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, really quickly, two very quick things. So first of all, I really resonate with what you said about what happens when you find a one philosopher that was, say, for a long time not read. I didn't know much about Anne Conway, so thank you for this beautiful introduction. I'm under the impression, I have the impression that precisely for that, one should avoid something that I found really a lot when I just, Googled her and tried to know something about her, because I mean it's a very evident temptation to just reduce her to something else. Like she's a pre-Leibniz, she's a pupil of Henry Moore, she's a no, I don't know, an attempt to say, yeah, it's basically a version of this. Whereas maybe what is interesting is precisely to try and find what in her philosophy cannot be reduced to Cambridge Platonism or to Leibniz philosophy, and etc. etc. But maybe just in a sentence, I feel like the problem is not so to say the relationship between the one and the many, but between the three and the many, so to say. So while you were speaking, maybe I was mistaken, but I feel like there is this Trinitarian understanding of reality, whereas Christ is the mediator between God and the Word. And it is said that there is an essence distinction between these three uh, domains, so to say. So that is difference, so to say. And then within this, there is the modal distinction between creatures, so to say. So I feel like, I don't know, the way how I would, so to say, address the singularity of what I understood, if I understood anything about Conway, is that this strange tension between, so to say, the three and the many, so to say, and not just a sort of monism within which everything is a modal distinction. But am I mistaken in that?
I think that the tree is complicated enough. It's the problem of the tree, I would say, because the tree is, in some sense, it's enough to define the many, right? So the problem of it's really the problem of the Trinity. She starts with tree, but she cannot start with the tree, right? So she starts actually with God. She conceives the matter, and then she conceives the creature, and she names this structure, this metaphysical framework, as a trinity. But what does it mean? It's a trinity, but it's just one, right? It's unity. Anyway, again, I don't think I have enough time nor resources to actually And I don't even think, again, so what do we do when we study metaphysics like this in the contemporary world? I think this is a question that always comes back to me, like, why am I studying this? It's very anachronistic and different and confusing and intellectually stimulating. So again, I think the effort is to be able to see how this worldview can change our regular, perhaps boring already, way of seeing the philosophical problems. So I would say that perhaps this is the originality of Conway's philosophy. I would, if you see it in this way, I think you are right. She's very wild and different. So definitely we should avoid putting her into our well-known concepts and frameworks. Rationalism, we know that it's a framework that it's not even enough to fit Spinoza and Leibniz and Descartes, but in some sense, it's helpful for us to understand the value or the priority of certain cognitive instruments that we have to know the world, right? Anyway, so I think that the problem of one and many in Conway, I agree with this part of what you said. It is transformed into the problem of Trinity. So, but I don't think it's the Trinity versus all other creatures. I think that the problem is the problem of Trinity. It's not one versus the many, is one, many, and communication between. So this extra thing, we can say, it's Christ, as she says. But I think it's she puts the relationship as a problem, as part, not as the problem, sorry. She puts relation as part of the I don't know, framework. It's not one versus the many, is one related with the many. So the relation should be present as part of the equation. I don't know whether what I'm saying makes any sense, but it's a relational metaphysics. It's not how to go from one to many, but and not how to conceive one and how to conceive many, but how to talk about this motion, how to talk about this relationship between one and many. In this sense, it's a trinity. We can use the word Christ, but we don't need. We can just say how to talk about the communication between God and creatures.
Yeah, in a way that the Turks are not offended, as was in the text. Yes, beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's about time to wrap up because I've been decolonizing philosophy all day and now I'm on to Conway. So I think it's time for me to go to bed. But look, yeah, thanks so much, Nastasia, for being here and for teaching us about Anne Conway and for engaging us with our questions. And yeah, it's been very educational, been a lot of fun. Yeah, and thanks everybody for your questions and for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for bearing with me and hope to see you all at some point in person some other day.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you,
morning.
Greg. Thank you, Nastasia. Thank you.